So I guess Mike Norvell's watching from afar thinking, I'd like to be there in a couple of years. Welcome in the Voice for College Football, another day of SEC Media Days, day number 2 on a Tuesday. The teams at the podium and their head coaches, of course, 3 players per team. Georgia, Mizzou, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. So a pretty strong day considering those are 4 that all have a chance to compete for a conference championship. And Kirby Smart, just got done listening to him and talking about what it means to win an SEC championship, because, of course, that is somewhat called into question these days with the 12-team college football playoff and whether conference championships are obsolete. Many of you tell me that here on our shows, and I totally get that perspective. Amazon links in the description section of all the videos, all the live streams, everything we do here at the Voice of College Football. The Amazon link is right there in the description section. It is the one way in which you can financially contribute here at the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. It's completely transparent to you. Please do your Amazon shopping using our link. SEC Media Days, we hope to be joined by a few contributors that are in Dallas. But in the meantime, we'll take your calls. We'll take your comments and questions as well. Big day at the Voice of College Football, always on a Tuesday. The schedule includes, as soon as we get done here, Iowa Live at 5:30 Eastern, Nebraska Live at 7, the Biggest 12 at 7:30, Michigan at 8. Of course, the Michigan show's on the Michigan channel, the Biggest 12 on the Big 12 channel, Nebraska Live on the Nebraska channel, and Iowa Live on the Iowa Hawkeyes channel. So please check out those live streams. I will be with you on the Iowa show along with Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Let's talk SEC football. I noticed one thing in these coaches and the way they address NIL now, that it's all above board. Even the tampering is above board, and they don't mention it that way. They don't talk about the tampering itself, but it's such a different approach that these coaches have. Number one, because they're more used to it. It's more comfortable for them, I'm sure, to discuss it because it's all out in the open. It's there. It's not anything that's taboo. And it was not taboo from the beginning, July 1st of 2022, 2021. But what it was it was still kind of this connection to the past. And it's not a good thing to be paying players. And we don't want to admit to that. And it's not an important thing. And sure, it's some vague thing. And so part of this is just understanding and being more educated about it. And of course, NIL being involved at these places and being more of part of the establishment, that the coaches are comfortable and just have more knowledge of it. But I just think that it's become so ingrained in the sport so quickly that they don't feel like they have to dance around it as much. That they need to avoid it, but they just talk about it directly. And Kirby Smart, of course, talked about how his molding of this program, building of this program, and preparing each team to win a championship goes along with one of the practices of studying an elite or championship caliber athlete, coach, business person, industry. And for this offseason, it was Nike. So he and his football team studying Nike, which reminds me of something else that I would like to get into involving Georgia and Kirby Smart, but we'll stick on the Nike theme. And of course, Nike's most connected to Oregon, Dan Lanning, defensive coordinator at Georgia just a few seasons ago. Of course, Kirby Smart could not help but take a bit of a dig at Dan Lanning and all the Nike money. But he was pretty serious about it otherwise and just talked about champions learn from champions, or aspiring champions learn from leaders in the industry, champions. Nick Saban used to do that all the time, whether it was bringing in Kobe Bryant to speak to his team or a business leader, a politician he respected, somebody that, and Kirby Smart, it sounds like, has taken it to the degree of actually making that a weekly project of studying. In this case, it was Nike from the bare bones, the beginning. And so that is one way in which he leads his football team. Nick Saban is being brought up in all these conversations, especially the longer the coach has been in the league, like a Lane Kiffin or a Kirby Smart. And of course, they coached under Nick Saban, as many have. And they would be the two big success stories in the league, in the conference right now, that have coached under Nick Saban, and talking about how much different this league, this sport is without Nick Saban, who fortunately, and it's a good thing for all of us, I think, that he's still in the sport, still active, and part of the media. It's funny how these guys knock the media for years and years and years as coaches, and then they become part of it. But not that Nick Saban has done that recently. I think he's been pretty above board, and he certainly goes out of his way during SEC Media Days to thank the media for what they do and for growing the sport and promoting the sport. But Kirby Smart, NIL, ecstatic that players get what they have earned. But of course, Carson Beck is an example of a guy that stuck around, who could have moved on and played somewhere else. We heard the same thing concerning Garrett Nussmeier, the LSU quarterback, on Monday, and his decision to stick around, even though he's got the skill set and is a big-time arm to move on and play elsewhere. So more on Kirby Smart here. He's got 4 new coaches this year, and he talked about assuming nothing. That was the first principle that they talked about with the Nike exchange, was assume nothing. It's a good point. That's what detailed people do, is they assume nothing. And Kirby Smart learned under the best, Nick Saban, and both of them extremely detailed. Talked about the road schedule. The Florida schedule is beyond reproach in terms of schedule rankings. Florida's got the toughest by far, but the road schedule for Georgia, which must mean that the home schedule must be fairly light, but the road schedule, Clemson's a neutral site, not necessarily a road game in Charlotte, a little bit closer for Clemson, I guess, but neutral site game, but still away from home. Texas, Bama, Ole Miss, all by early October, mid-October, at Ole Miss, at Bama, at Texas. If Georgia loses the first game of the season, which I do not expect them to fall in the first game of the season against Clemson. However, if they would, and that's not inconceivable, Clemson has scholarship players, and they're pretty darn good. They're a top 12 or 15 team as it stands right now in college football. That then it becomes mighty interesting the rest of the season in terms of making a college football playoff. Even though the Clemson game does not factor into the conference schedule, it's pretty much a clear-cut 10-2 will get you to the playoff, and 9-3 puts you in a bad place. So he says the schedule is getting his players' attention, getting their focus. They embrace it. They love it. They want to play against the best. He said all those typical things. Expanded college football playoff. Okay, we're past the point to, I think, talk about whether we like it or not, although I will continue to make those conversations. But in terms of the coaches themselves, it's here. It's here to stay. Will be expanded to 14 or 16 at some point, you would think, but they have to just deal with it. And so what that means for a guy like Kirby Smart, who coaches arguably the best program in the country, is something similar to what we heard out of Ryan Day at one point, that you have to practice a bit differently. You have to play that medium game. You have to balance preparing a tough football team. Football is about blocking and tackling. You've got to be tough. You've got to be physically prepared, and you get tough, and tackling is a skill. It's a want to, it's a desire. You've got to want to, and you've got to be determined to tackle because it's a hard thing to do, but it's also, there's a skill set to it. So you got to practice it, and you can go through all the various half speed tackling drills, but you just got to get out there and tackle. And you can only do so much during the regular season. Once the season starts, that it's all about that August camp. And camp should be a grind, and it should be tough. And Kirby Smart said it's still got to be tough to prepare a team to be tough. But we have to understand we got a long season ahead of us, hopefully. And if you don't prepare a tough football team, don't practice tackling, aren't physical, then you're not going to be needing to worry about extra games anyway. Kirby Smart talked about the catch-22 in terms of recruiting the best players, recruiting great players, recruiting great athletes, turning them into great players, and then they leave for the NFL draft as juniors. And so that's something that, of course, Georgia deals with as much, if not more, than anyone in the country over the past 5 years or so, is losing juniors. And he ripped off a plethora of guys that they are going to significantly miss. Kirby loves the conference championship game. He believes it's one of the best events in college sports and sports total, the SEC championship game. I love the conference championship games. I would love to have a model of format in college football that would lend itself to making these important again. But that's not what the 12-team playoff has done. It has diminished the conference championship games. And yes, there is a bonus. Yes, there is an advantage to winning a conference. Not just putting the ring on the finger and the trophy at the athletics center, but for that team to be able to draw the bye, not have to play. But of course, they had to play the extra game to not have to play the first round game. And the first round game is going to be a challenge for just about everyone outside of the 5 seed, which is the best of the non-conference champions that would have faced Liberty last year. And I see, at least according to the Phil Steele schedule rankings, that Liberty, once again, is the worst schedule in the country. I think he had Kennesaw State at the very last position, but Liberty was one notch above them. And this Liberty team was allowed to go to the playoff, or to the New Year's Six round, and play in a major bowl game last year against Oregon, get their doors blown off. I really hope and do believe that the College Football Playoff Selection Committee will give more attention to Group of 5 results and to not just elevating the best record, but elevating the best team into the playoff. So that team would have been SMU last year, not Liberty. That would have been SMU, not that they would have won a game in a playoff or that they would have beaten Oregon in the bowl game last year, but they had the same record as Liberty against Group of 5 opponents, and they played a much tougher schedule in the American Conference versus Liberty did. And then they played 2 non-conference games against power teams and lost those games. So they did not have the record of Liberty, but they had better credentials. So hopefully the committee will get that right going forward, because it means so much more. It's now a playoff selection that they have to determine. Before, it was simply a New Year's Six bid for the best of the Group of 5. So playoff committee, listen up, do what's right, select the best team. And Kirby Smart, again, talked about conference championships, and he does not want the SEC championship game to go away. I would expect that no coach is going to claim that, going to state that, because they're going to toe the company line, which is that there's a conference championship game, and therefore it's the most amazing thing in the world. And then once they get rid of the conference championship game, it will be the best decision for all. Under this format, I don't know how conference championship games, other than the money factor, which is huge. So they could merely survive because of the monetary gain, which is enormous. The SEC championship game gets a great rating. It's been the best conference championship game by and large, year after year after year after year, with the best teams playing. You usually have some kind of outlier, of course, from the Big Ten Western Division, like that's number 15 or 18 in the country, and the ACC, and what was the Pac-12 and the Big 12, where typically there's one major national championship contender in a conference championship game, and they're playing like number 17 in the country. That's fairly common in those other conferences. The Big Ten's sometime an exception, 2017. But in the SEC, it's almost always two of the top 4 or 5 teams in college football playing. And it's been great. It's been going on since 1992. It's been an event, and it's been spectacular. But unless somebody can figure out a way to make this 12-team college football playoff more dependent on conference championships, maybe it's a thing of the past. Again, I don't think that's a decision that's going to be made anytime soon because the money is just too good. So that's my basic take on Kirby Smart's day at the podium. And I also heard his side session as well. He was on the ESPN morning show as well. Talked about playing at Auburn, one of the toughest venues in college football. Amazon links in the description section of all the videos, all the live streams. Please grab the Amazon link. You'll see Amazon in caps. Grab the link right next to it. Please do your Amazon shopping using that link. We have left the link to the call-in show. That is in the chat as well. Jackson, we appreciate you being here, man. Jackson, of course, an integral part of what we do here, the Voice of College Football, and especially on social media. Check out our new X account, the official account of the Voice of College Football. We just posted just a few minutes ago, and that was, a post that I personally created, actually, just got posted. About some records that could be set, some all-time records in college football this year. So check that out. Here's the rundown for the next few weeks. Of course, we're going to be here throughout this week as SEC Media Days takes us through Thursday, correct? Yes, Thursday for SEC Media Days. 4 teams per day. So Monday through Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern time right here, SEC Media Days. Next week, we do the same with the ACC and the Big Ten. We'll be here every day at 4 Eastern, covering the Big Ten and the ACC Media Days, and we will have somebody on location at Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis. How about that? I made the trip last year. I will not make the trip this year, but we do have credentials, and we will be on site for Big Ten Media Days. So the Big Ten and the ACC next week. And the questions about Florida State and Clemson, mainly Florida State and Clemson next week at what they call the ACC kickoff, ACC Media Days. So again, we invite your calls. Please give us a call. The link is in the chat. Ballard he would give me a call, but he's at work. But good to hear that he's listening in. So Jason here makes a point that receiving the bye is going to keep conference championship games important. I understand that point. However, you just played an extra game to receive a bye. You played an extra game against a team that may be better than the team that you play in the playoffs to receive a bye. I don't think it's a great... I think it's an advantage, no doubt. You do not have to play on the opening weekend of the playoff. And I don't think at this point it's any secret. I don't know who uncovered it initially, but we've certainly talked about it here forever, at least as long as the playoffs format has been released, that the 5 seed is in good shape. So you got 4 make the playoff as conference championships. And take what could be a reasonable scenario. Let's say the Big Ten champion is 12-1. They're going to be the second or third ranked team in the country, maybe number 1. And let's say the SEC champion's the same. They're 12-1 as they were last year. So last year's national champions or conference champions were Bama in the Big Ten or in the SEC at 12-1. And of course, Michigan in the Big Ten at 13-0. And last year, of course, Florida State, they were 13-0 at the time. So they would have been a high seed and a highly ranked team. And then you would have had Texas. So that worked out last year. Okay, you can go through many years throughout the 10-year period of a 14 playoff and before that and see where an ACC champion wasn't necessarily a tremendous team, may have had 2 or 3 losses. Same thing in the Big 12, same thing in the Big 10. Rarely in the SEC, almost never in the SEC. But in those other conferences where, we'll take this year, for example, it would not be a great surprise to anyone if the Big Ten champion and the SEC champions have 0-1 losses, and they are the 2 top teams in college football. So they're the 1 and 2 seeds. And then let's say the number 3 team in the country is the team that lost the Big Ten championship game or lost the SEC championship game. Well, they drop down to 5. And let's say Utah wins the Big 12 and they're 10-3. Let's say Florida State wins the ACC. They're 10-3. Well, those teams are going to be ranked 10th or 12th in the country, but they will get 2 of those top seeds in the top 4. And then all of a sudden you jump to the 5th seed. Well, that's going to be the number 3 team in the country. And I'm not saying that Utah could not have a sterling record, or Florida State like they did last year, and be a top 3 or 4 ranked team in the country. But history has shown us that, and the movement of Oklahoma and Texas, and then the 4 from the West Coast of the Big Ten, that the likelihood of these teams as champions from the ACC and the Big 12 consistently being the top teams in the country, there's going to be an odd look to the playoff in that way, that you could have the number 1 team in the country, the number 2 team in the country, the number 9 team in the country, the number 13 team in the country, and then you go to the 5th seed and you got the number 3 team in the country. And they're playing Liberty. So that's a good place to be. So yeah, the bye to me and the conference championship is not as meaningful as it should be. And more games, more chances, as is being noted in the chat, more chances that there could be, of course, injury, and you want to avoid injury. All right, we're going to talk some Oklahoma football. Brent Venables hit the podium along with players today. We got John Williams on the line from Sooners Wire. Hey, John, what's going on?
Not a whole lot. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing pretty good. It's exciting days. Oklahoma now in the SEC and getting an opportunity to really introduce ourselves to those fan bases. And I'm excited for what this season's going to bring.
John, we appreciate you answering the call. Of course, Brent Venables took the podium as the first time as an SEC head coach. And is there anything in particular that stood out in regards to what Venables had to say at the podium, or side sessions or otherwise?
You know, for Brent Venables, he is always going to be somebody that exudes a little bit of confidence while also walking that fine line with humility. You know, he's not going to be, you know, a very boisterous or proud, you know, if that's the way to put it, but he is going to talk about Oklahoma's success. And that's what he did. He went out there and he described that Oklahoma is a program that's had more than 100 years of success. They've got, you know, 50 conference championships, 7 national championships, 7 Heisman winners. There's a lot of success for Oklahoma to be proud of as they enter the SEC, while also understanding that there's a challenge that they're going to be facing week to week in the SEC. He mentioned off camera, you know, in some of the side sessions, as being reported that Oklahoma didn't necessarily have the best response to success after beating Texas last year. And we've seen that over the years with the Oklahoma Sooners over the last decade. Teddy Lehman, Oklahoma linebacker great, described it as sleepwalking today on Twitter, where this was a program that, you go back to 2020, they had back-to-back losses to Iowa State, Kansas State. You even go back to this past season when, you know, they lost to Kansas and Oklahoma State in back-to-back weeks. Oklahoma needs the challenge. They need to understand that, hey, every single week is going to be a bit of a gauntlet. They're not going to be able to sleepwalk through any games. You know, you go against an Auburn team in Jordan-Hare Stadium, you know, your first SEC road trip, it doesn't matter what Auburn's record was last year. That's going to be a really, really tough game for the Oklahoma Sooners.
John, you brought up Texas, so I'm going to go this route because I think this has been an interesting dynamic here in that Texas, aside from one good season in which they won the Sugar Bowl under Tom Herman and lost to Oklahoma in the conference championship, they've been down. They've been down since 2009 up until last season, of course. Oklahoma's been owning the Big 12. Texas, to me, as an outsider who just watches the sport, talks to fans, but I've not covered those teams in person. Texas seems to be the more boisterous fan base and more boisterous brand. And now they've got a season to brag about to go into the SEC. And the national narrative is that Texas is ready. Where if we're just one season removed from 8-5 and a season removed before that from 5-7, where people were like, Texas is going to be in the SEC. Boy, they're going to get embarrassed. So they've suddenly arrived. Okay, it's one season. Oklahoma won the game in the matchup between the two teams. And Oklahoma, man, you look at Texas, overtime scare against Kansas State, 4th down scare against Houston. You know, they had their close calls. It could have easily been Oklahoma in the playoff and not Texas. And you wonder how much that changes the evaluation and perception of most people as the readiness of these programs going into the SEC.
One thing I've said, and I've said it multiple times, is I feel like the media has been waiting for Texas to do just this so that they could have a whole offseason to talk about how good Texas is, that Texas is quote unquote back. But this is an Oklahoma program that's bringing back a lot of talent. Even though there's a lot of turnover, they have one of the most talented and deepest defenses in the country, bringing back a lot of experience and production on that defensive side of the ball. And that's going to help them. Texas has got talent. They're going to be a very talented team. That's never been the issue with Texas, right? It's been a matter of maintaining that consistent level of production and performance. They lost 11 guys to the NFL draft, and that's not going to be a problem. To me, it's surprising we're not hearing more discussion about that. Did they add guys through the transfer portal? Absolutely. Isaiah Bond, he's going to be a problem for everybody that lines up opposite him at the cornerback position, even in the SEC. They've got a really good offensive line. They've got a quarterback in Quinn Ewers who is pretty good. I don't think he's reached that place where we just view him as a no doubt elite quarterback prospect. I think he's been pretty good and he's got good tools, but I don't think he's this can't miss guy right now and somebody that you're automatically asserting as the Heisman favorite. Now, I think there's questions about Texas, even if they've had this successful season. The schedule, it lays out pretty well for them, even though they do have Georgia on the slate. And I think that's where some of the discrepancy lies, is that Oklahoma has got 6 teams on their conference schedule that are probably going to be in the top 15 of the AP and USA Today coaches poll when those get released in August. The Texas Longhorns, they don't have that same level of depth on their schedule in the SEC. And that's just the way it broke. Oklahoma fans, we're not fearing that. We realize that it's going to be tough, but this is what you wanted to get into the SEC for these marquee matchups, this list of games that are going to move the needle every single week. So it's exciting. Yeah. Are they going to have challenges? No doubt about it. But I think this Oklahoma team is getting set up for success in the SEC. They've bolstered the defensive line by adding a guy like Dominic Williams, one of the most high profile defensive tackle prospects in the transfer portal this offseason. They were able to bring back Dejon Terry, who helped really revolutionize their short yardage defense at defensive tackle. They've had some of their best recruiting classes under Brent Venables over the last 3 years. They've got blue chip prospects on both sides of the ball, including a quarterback in Jackson Arnold, who has the chance to be one of Oklahoma's best. And he's going to be, I think by the time his career is said and done, remembered in those same light as a Baker Mayfield or a Kyler Murray or Jalen Hurts or Sam Bradford. I mean, he's got the talent, he's got the arm, he's got the right mindset, the intangibles to go and be every bit as successful as some of those other guys.
And we certainly see a lot of Danny Stutzman and Billy Bowman on preseason all-conference and all-America lists, and Peyton Bowen proved to be one of the elite freshman defensive players in the country with a world of potential. We got John Williams here from Sooners Wire breaking down OU as the Sooners headed to Dallas this week. They're used to going there for a football game against Texas, of course, but they do that for the first time at SEC Media Days. Sticking with the defense, this is the best defense, or could be the best defense since, fill in the blank for me. It's been a long time.
I mean, you might think about 2010, 2009, 2008. I mean, the Gerald McCoy, Tommy Harris, those years where Gerald McCoy was at 2008, went and got drafted in 2009. That might be the last time Oklahoma had a truly elite defensive tackle prospect. And you feel really, really good about what they've got up the middle now. Now, some of their defensive tackles that you're really excited about are true freshmen coming into this year. David Stone, Jaden Jackson, two guys that have legit NFL talent. They're just true freshmen. But a guy like Dominic Williams, again, he's going to be around 320. He's going to be able to play that nose tackle position, but he also has the juice. He's got the athleticism to be a difference maker at the 3 technique defensive tackle spot as well. You talked about Danny Stutzman. I mean, I really think he and Billy Bowman could have gone in the top 100 of the NFL draft in 2024, but decided to come back for one more year. That's huge. So up the middle, Oklahoma is really, really strong. And then at the cornerback spot, that's where a lot of the questions are going to be and where the camp competition is going to be focused on, because you don't really know exactly who's going to be starting on the outside for you. You feel really good about Gentry Williams, an Oklahoma native, was a 4-star prospect in the 2022 recruiting class, but had some injury difficulties last year. When he was on the field, he was Oklahoma's best cover corner, and he was really, really good. Opened the Red River rivalry with an interception of Quinn Ewers early in that game, but he battled shoulder issues all season long. And then it's the other spot. Okay. Is it going to be Woody Washington? Well, they're talking about moving the veteran corner around a lot in the defense. Could play some safety, could play some of the Brent Venables cheetah, but they've got some other guys at cornerback that are going to be competing for snaps that were blue chip prospects in their own right. So it's going to be fascinating to see what lands at corner, but the talent along the defensive line is much better than what it was just a few years ago. At linebacker, they've got great depth, and the safety position is one that I think everybody's really excited about. You mentioned Bowman, you mentioned Peyton Bowen, but they've got a guy in Robert Spears Jennings, a Tulsa native, who came on strong when he got opportunities last year and just plays fast and he plays physical, and he's going to take a step, and I think going to be one of Oklahoma's breakout players this year.
Of course, it's become rather frequent that a big-time quarterback misses the bowl game preparing for the NFL draft. This is providing an opportunity to see the next player. We could go across the country. Garrett Nussmeier, LSU, stepping in for Jaden Daniels, lit up Wisconsin. Caleb Williams sitting down, and of course Miller Moss, Louisville. Jackson Dart showed us a little bit of both in regards to, there were the turnovers, but there were the big yardage plays as well in the bowl game, and just talk about his development and preparing for this season.
Yeah, Jackson Arnold's one of those kids that he's got all the talent in the world. He's got the big arm. He can make all the throws. I think what we saw against Arizona in the Alamo Bowl was figuring out there's a few throws you can't make. And at the collegiate level, you cannot be late. He had Drake Stoops running down the sideline, and it would have been a really easy completion, but he just hesitated and didn't throw that ball on time. And by the time he let it loose, the safety was coming across, and it was a no-doubter interception. And then, the other couple interceptions that he threw, I think a couple of those were just really good plays by the Arizona defense. I mean, he made good throws. They just came downhill, made a really, really nice play on the ball. So just a learning opportunity for him, figuring out, and he mentioned it at SEC Media Days, just figuring out what I can get away with and what I can't, not trying to play outside of myself and play outside of the system. And I think that is what's going to be the biggest development of this season, is understanding, hey, play within the system, don't try to do too much, and then also throw on time. Don't be late, because when you're late at the collegiate level, and then especially at the NFL level, you're going to get picked off.
John, before we let you go, we got a question coming in from our guy, Jackson, who asks, who do you miss more, Nebraska or Oklahoma State?
So I asked this question also recently, and the prevailing answer was Nebraska. That's one of those rivalries that, similar to Texas, it dates back a long, long time, especially some of the older fans that watched Oklahoma football in the 70s. They remember the back and forth between Barry Switzer and Tom Osborne. And when those two teams were basically at the height, they were the pinnacle of college football. They were the Georgia, Alabama back in the 70s, just going back and forth and trading, national titles and conference titles in the Big Eight. I, for one, being an Oklahoma native, I love the Bedlam rivalry. I think it means a lot to the state. I think it means a lot to fans. I'm out in the eastern half of the state, where there's a lot more Oklahoma State fans than there are. I mean, I say a lot more, but there's a bigger percentage of Oklahoma State fans out here than there might be in Oklahoma City. So we get to interact a lot more, and we get to talk Bedlam and go back and forth and have that rivalry trash talk. But I think overall, it's Nebraska. When Nebraska got put on the non-conference schedule, I had Tony Casillas on our show just a few years back, and he talked about how important it was to bring Nebraska back onto the schedule. And if anybody could choose an annual non-conference game between Oklahoma State and Nebraska, I think a large percentage of Oklahoma fans would choose Nebraska.
John Williams, check out his work there on Sooners Wire. John, we appreciate you taking the call and jumping on here with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. We're just 6 weeks away from the college football season. We're almost there.
Thanks, John. All right, let's keep it rolling here at the Voice of College Football. Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss took the podium on Monday. We got Zach Morith joining us. He joins us, of course, from the Rebel Walk. Zach, what's going on today?
Mark, how are you doing, sir?
Doing well. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. So Lane Kiffin, anything that stuck out in regards to his address with the media on Monday?
Yeah, so just the first thing, Mark, is it's going to be the most difficult challenge all year for Ole Miss. And that's, kind of handling the rat poison, as he refers to, but handling all the expectations and the pressure of, having the number one transfer portal class, returning players like Jackson Dart and Trey Harris and a bunch of key defenders. Guys like that, the media is hyping them up. These guys go on Twitter. They're seeing how good they are. To Lane's point, he's going to try his best to just keep it as easy going as possible in the locker room. But for a team who isn't used to having such high expectations, it could be a challenge, potentially getting into guys' heads or just focusing on how can we stay focused on the game rather than what people are saying about us, whether that's positive or negative. But that's going to be easily the main challenge for this year. And he addresses it almost every press conference. And as you can tell, it's going to be a huge thing moving forward, especially in those early games of the season, because the first 4 games, Ole Miss really doesn't play any sort of challenging opponent. So they're probably going to be 4-0 looking at Kentucky. And then from there, it continues. And it's going to be, how can we keep these guys in the locker room level instead of getting over our heads and losing a road game at South Carolina or a home game against Kentucky? It's easy for teams to slip up when they're not used to having the expectations like Ole Miss has going into this season.
Who did Lane Kiffin bring with him?
Yeah, he brought defensive end Jared Ivey, wide receiver Trey Harris, and obviously quarterback Jackson Dart.
Okay, so let's start with Jackson Dart. Anyone who watches college football on a fairly regular basis and knows the SEC at all knows that Jackson Dart is, I think he's one of the very best quarterbacks in the country. He's not a national star, though, but this may be his opportunity to break through and become that guy. Just your thoughts about Jackson Dart's development and ready for a big season.
Yeah, he's ready, Mark. He's going to have the chance to take that next step. He's working with a much better wide receiver core, and he still had one of the best wide receiver cores in the country last year. But, Ole Miss went out and acquired Juice Wells from South Carolina in the transfer portal. And again, this guy has the potential to be a first-round pick if he stays healthy. Another thing being is that Jackson Dart is going to have more of an opportunity to throw the ball, Mark. Last year with Quinshon Judkins, who now is at Ohio State, there was a lot of running involved. And when you don't have a guy like Quinshon Judkins, you have to find other ways to move the ball down the field. And Jackson is going to have that opportunity. Ole Miss also acquired Daquan Wright, a tight end out of Virginia Tech. And Daquan's a tight end who's he plays more of the flex role. He can be bumped outside to a wide receiver if need be. But he's going to be a guy over the middle of the field who Jackson is going to continuously look for, and a target he didn't really have last year. So as crazy as it sounds, I would look for Dart to, increase even more passing yards in this upcoming season.
And the defense, when Lane Kiffin got to Ole Miss, took a little while, had some pretty shoddy defensive efforts, but that is certainly not the case now.
Not at all, Mark. It's gotten a lot better. There were times last year when it struggled. The first game that comes to mind, despite the win, was against LSU. Ole Miss was down 2 scores in the fourth quarter. They somehow end up winning 55-49, but it felt like the defense was non-existent. And then, again, obviously the loss at Georgia, it was glaring. Georgia, they may have gotten stopped once or twice the entire game. Absolutely decimated the Ole Miss defense. So Kiffin's talked about it. He talked about it after that Georgia game. They had to go recruit. They had to get length. They had to get size and SEC-type players who could compete with the best. And I do want to read this quote from Nick Saban. He talked about it on SEC Network. He said, "I think this is the first time Ole Miss can really match up front. It's always been their issue. They'll win 11 games. They'll lose to Georgia. They'll lose to us because they can't match up front. But this year they can. They're going to look like more like an SEC team," said Saban. So even, it's being recognized. They acquired Walter Nolan, Prince Umanmielen, 2 freakish defensive linemen through the transfer portal. And Kiffin's really working to just cover that hole from last year, which, again, it was shown pretty easily when you played teams like LSU and Georgia who had those dominant offenses. But we'll see. I think with Pete Golding putting things together, it's going to work out nicely. Obviously, again, he struggled at times last year, but he's working with a roster at Ole Miss of which he's never had before. And that's the same thing with Lane. He's never had a defense as talented at Ole Miss. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but they just need to put the pieces together and really show on the field that, this is the Ole Miss defense product, which we're capable of.
Zach, I did not hear from Lane Kiffin. I'm going to go back and watch that, but did he say anything off the cuff? Did he come out with anything that's one of his trademarks? Say anything controversial?
That was kind of confusing, Mark. We didn't really get much of that. I was waiting for it the whole time, but I think what might have prohibited some of that was the passing of his father. Because to start it, he had to he said some words about Monty.
Good reminder. Yes.
Yeah. So obviously, God rest his soul, but he wasn't really I don't think he was in the mood that he usually is.
Yeah.
But still, it was a good press conference for sure.
Folks, if you're not familiar, Monty Kiffin, one of the great defensive minds and coaches in the history of college football, Lane's dad passed away was maybe just here in the last 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
So absolutely rest in peace there. And yeah, just a guy that's renowned across the sport and in the NFL, of course,
Absolutely.
for what he's accomplished. And some really, heartfelt posts on social media. Monty Kiffin, Lane Kiffin showing some pictures I saw with he and his dad when he was younger. And yeah, some really good stuff there to see. All right. Anything else, Zach?
No, I mean, I'm just looking forward to August 31st here, Mark. We're getting there, man.
We're getting there. And I'm guessing the Rebels go to camp right around August 1st.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They're doing 2 practices a week here, and then obviously fall camp will kick off then.
Nice. Zach, we appreciate you stopping by, man.
Thank you so much, Mark. Have a great day, sir.
You too.
Thanks.
Zach Moreth, Rebel Walk, the Rebel Walk. Our friends over there, Evie and the gang, do a tremendous job covering Ole Miss athletics, and it should be a fun season for them as Ole Miss is looking to make a college football playoff. So many teams across the country looking for this opportunity that did not, well, it existed, of course. There was a 14 playoff, but seemed certainly a pipe dream to get to a 14 playoff through the likes of Alabama and Georgia in the SEC. And, we could line up the other elite teams in the other conferences that have been difficult to get through to a playoff bid. Shane Beamer, South Carolina coach, he laid it out there as that's where we'd like to be on a regular basis. Of course, South Carolina, the way they played last year, they just need to get to a bowl game. Get to a bowl game first, Shane. But Shane Beamer talked more than anyone else, and he also talked about getting to the college football playoff. We've got an Iowa show lined up for 5:30 Eastern. That's over on the Hawkeyes channel here at the Voice of College Football. Then we've got Nebraska at 7. That's Eastern. The Biggest 12 at 7:30. And the Michigan show is at 8 Eastern time over on the Michigan channel. We have been all over realignment situations this week. And you know our deal here at the Voice of College Football. We report on breaking news, of course. We are here as soon as possible when there's breaking news. We also respond to legitimate comments, valid comments made by important people of influence, chancellors, presidents, athletic directors. This is a bit of a different deal over the last couple of weeks. We've just had fun looking at various potential models that could be coming. Like, let's say the Big Ten adds Florida State and Notre Dame. We looked at that. We looked at a different Big 12 with Clemson and Florida State and others on board. We looked at the SEC with Clemson and Florida State on board. We looked at just, again, various configurations. Check out the videos. They're fun. And so I go from making my projections, which I don't really necessarily major on projections as much as I am lining up schools, teams, football programs, their situations, academics, media influence, all of that, and talking about the pros and cons of them joining different conferences. Today, though, we got a release from Brett McMurphy, formerly of ESPN, now with the Action Network. Brett McMurphy lining up based on his sources. And the one position that he dropped in terms of a source was president, university president, saying that Big Ten and the SEC do not want Florida State. Now, this could change, and these are just 3 or 4 presidents making their statements about. And so check out, again, I'm not going to go through it. We're talking about SEC Media Days here, but go through the earlier live stream because I had much to say about the McMurphy article and why this could be on hold and why this could be a no-go for Florida State in particular. Now, Clemson was not necessarily addressed in this. This was a Florida State thing. Well, you would think on the surface that Florida State and Clemson's credentials are almost identical in terms of a brand, football accomplishments recently, football accomplishments and status right now. Their media draws are not that different. We could dissect it. We could go through the games and the networks and the ratings to point out some type of difference or gap between the two, but generally that does not exist. Clemson, Florida State both do very well. Not at the very top of the sport, but very well in terms of bringing eyeballs. But it had to do with some other factors specifically related to Florida State. So check out the live stream that we provided earlier today. That was enlightening, let's say. Because again, we put together some of our sources. We put together what we've been talking about. And most of what I talk about, some of it has to do with sources, but much of what I have to talk about is just kind of understanding the landscape of the sport and looking at pros and cons and possibilities and probabilities, and then putting that together with and matching up what we've talked about just here recently in the last couple of weeks, reading the tea leaves out there, and now, boom, this McMurphy article lines up fairly well with that. All right, back to SEC Media Days. Keep in mind that Brett Venables and Josh Heupel, of course, were at OU together when Heupel was winning a national championship as a quarterback and Brent Venables on the defensive staff. And Tennessee and Oklahoma, one of the big early season matchups in the SEC. Josh Heupel was at the podium today. Talked about winning a baseball championship there at Tennessee and how much that inspires him and his program to aspire to that. The waiting list for Tennessee season tickets is apparently 15,000 strong. Nico Iamaleavea, of course, produced in the bowl game, looked great, and we know about his recruitment. It was one of the most publicized recruitments in recent college football. And is he going to be a breakout guy? Think of how many guys did not have much experience or next to no experience, like Trevor Lawrence, like Bryce Young, and others. And still they were up to the challenge and leading their teams to championship games. Tennessee's offense wasn't quite what it had been. One of the reasons why was Hendon Hooker ran that offense just that well, and Joe Milton did not. And Tennessee's got a great wide receiver core. It's deep. And Brew McCoy coming back, and they picked up Chris Brazzell from Tulane. But their wide receiver core, because of some injuries, and of course, Jalen Hyatt moving on from the season before, and Cedric Tillman, the wide receivers not up to Josh Heupel's class. Status, expectations this past season. Talked about the offensive line, defensive line being of SEC caliber and very strong there at Tennessee. Let's go to the phone lines. We got Real MVP on the line. Hey,
Hey, Mark, how you doing this evening?
I am good. What's going on?
I'm doing great. You know what I like, Mark, is I like clarity and solidarity. And that's why I loved when Sankey came out and just said 16 is a great number, Mark. What do you think about the number 16? I personally love that number. I think it's better than numbers like 18, 20, 22, because at that level you start to get too big. But what are your thoughts?
Well, if we hadn't gone past some other numbers like 10 and 12, I would like those numbers better. So if you want to really ask my opinion about it, not just going forward and all this talk of expanding these conferences to look like the NFL, I would say 10 or 12 is much better than 16.
Oh, I would agree with that absolutely as well, Mark, but we don't live in an idealistic world. We got to be practical and pragmatic about the world we live in. So I'm going to take small mercies when I can.
Okay. So in that case, I will say 16 looks great, looks phenomenal. And again, if you understand math out there, folks, in terms of scheduling and seedings and those sorts of things, 16 works really well. Although the SEC wanting to stay at 16 could also be moved because the Big Ten keeps going.
Could be, but I mean, what's out there, Mark, other than Notre Dame? There's a whole lot of nothing out there. I mean,
nothing?
Just a lot of garbage.
You're talking about football? You're talking about money? You're talking about academics? What are we talking about? Were you talking just football?
I'm just talking about the reports that are currently out there that, there's just not a whole lot out there other than Notre Dame. I can't help what the information that is out there is currently saying. And if people are saying nobody wants anything other than Notre Dame, then I have to believe them.
Yes. So I don't know if you caught our live stream earlier today, but I think we were pretty clear on these things. And we read through Brett McMurphy's article. And a lot of his points that are substantiated by sources and not just, the term sources gets thrown all over the place. But he actually mentioned school presidents in the Big Ten and in the SEC and quoted them. That, I think it's a bit surprising to the average college football fan that a Clemson, and this article was solely talking about Florida State. So we've kind of put the two together, and I get that because they're both in court against the ACC, both trying to get out at the same time. And they're very similar programs in their successes. They're not at the very tippy top of the sport right now, but they're really good and they're close. And again, they've had their times dominating the ACC and being nationally significant. But maybe it's just been assumed, and I'll put myself in this category to a certain extent, that Florida State, Clemson, Florida State, it's pretty much the same team, same program, same school. They'll probably just go together somewhere. Or if one makes it into the Big Ten, then the other will certainly make the SEC because they're pretty much of the same value. But as was pointed out in this article, and actually I've mentioned it a few times, just in general, that if you understand business and understand how business is conducted, and knowing that most of these guys are, let's say, in their 50s and 60s that make these moves, if not older, they've been around a long time and they've run into each other. Therefore, there are good relationships and there are not so good relationships. And this article, according to what was stated there, maybe Florida State's had some not so good relationships with some people that they could use now, that they could need on their side, and they don't have them on their side.
Yeah, Mark, unity is a very important thing in all aspects of life. And when you have such a destabilizing force like Florida State, I mean, let's just be honest, Mark. Florida State had it when they signed that piece of paper, had a word with the ACC. The most powerful thing any person has is their word. And Florida State, in my opinion, they broke their word because they didn't get selected into the college football playoff.
And one of the things that was pointed out to us last week by our guy, Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football, when he came on to talk about this, because he's following verbatim every one of these court hearings. He's listening to them, going through the whole thing. And when it's close, there in his state of North Carolina, he's going down there, he's sitting through it. All of that is that ESPN, even though they're not named in these suits because they are attached to the ACC, they have a vested interest in that. They are paying lawyers to sit through these court cases in both Florida and North Carolina. So they have a vested interest. So in a sense, Florida State by extension is suing ESPN and also trying to unveil and reveal trade secrets from what ESPN considers to be trade secrets. I think it's a little overblown, but trade secrets. And I will admit myself to be guilty of this too, in kind of brushing past that to envision Florida State joining the SEC when who owns the SEC's television rights exclusively? Disney, ESPN. So they're going to just sit through all of this legal affair that's costing millions and millions and millions of dollars, and then forge a settlement, and then the next day shake hands with Florida State on a new contract in the SEC. Doesn't seem likely.
Seems rather like a foolish endeavor, I would say, Mark. I would almost go as far as to say Florida State thought with their emotions instead of logic.
Man, I would hope not.
I mean, Mark, do you know about Occam's razor? The most simplest explanation is the likeliest. I mean,
Yes.
What other explanation is there than they got left out of the playoffs? They got mad. They wanted out. Nobody wants them. What is the more simple explanation than that?
Well, I think that whether pressured by the media, ESPN, that the committee made what it wasn't necessarily a fair judgment for Florida State because they won all their games, but they at least made a reasonable evaluation of football. And I don't agree with it because I like to stick to the wins and losses, but I understood it. I understood the assessment that this Florida State team's not as good as these four other teams, especially since they don't have their starting quarterback and they've looked like complete crap on offense without their starting quarterback against two okay teams. So they're not one of the four best teams in the country. Now, that could have been solely the committee making that determination, or that could have been the committee pressured by ESPN to say, we won good playoff games, and so you were not selecting Florida State. I don't know.
Right. That's why the year before they selected TCU to make the playoffs over Alabama. You know, Mark, TCU's just this TV juggernaut.
Yes, that. Well, they did go to the championship game.
Yeah, I'm sure.
If we're still calling that the championship game for the year,
glorified bye in the national championship game is what I'll call it. It was better than a bye for Georgia. But anyway, Mark, you mentioned in that live stream having Greg Flugard on and how he's a great guy, or having how great of a guy he is. I think you should have him on because he's been over the target when it comes to the Pac-12 demise, when it comes to the USC and UCLA move. And he's got a very small YouTube channel, and I think you platforming him would increase his channel. And I think he deserves that. So if you could get him on just kind of to lay the landscape in a live stream, because he understands the nitty-gritty details better than almost anybody. And he's been, he takes flack from all sides because nobody likes hearing bad news. It's the truth, but it's bad news.
Well, yeah, Greg's a great guy. And I'll just say that he's the guy, if people aren't aware out there, that my total understanding of the situation is that he uncovered the USC UCLA move to the Big Ten. He was way out in front of that, and he was the guy that had that story before anybody else. And I'll pop into his live streams. I don't want to say often, a couple times a year for a few minutes. And more than that, he started to follow me on Twitter a few years ago, and I wasn't aware of him at the time, but we've traded a lot of text messages and so forth, and spoken a few times directly. And he's a great guy, and he's made very kind, nice comments about me. And so, yeah, we would like to do that. Absolutely.
Right. Now, there's always some tangent of people that don't like hearing the truth. So what do you think about the Florida State fans that are just in this massive cope spiral thinking they're still going to the Big Ten? Do you think they're delusional? Do you think they're just in shock that nobody cares about them, nobody wants them? What do you think about those people?
Well, I understand it. The Big 12 doesn't have the greatest reputation. Not that they've done anything wrong, but they are not looked upon as a landing spot for elite programs. And so Florida State had an assumption that they were going to be playing in the Big Ten or the SEC, and had to a great degree the assumption that they would actually be able to choose and make their decision where they wanted to go. And it was my thought as well that, number one, they have severed ties with the ACC. There is no returning from this. Like, there's just been too much blood out in the open in public, and too much bitterness and resentment out there, and too much money spent to get out. So they're out of the ACC in my eyes. Now, maybe there might be a 1 or 2% chance that they'll shake hands and pull it all together, especially if Florida State knows that their only option is going to the Big 12. I don't know. But if you're just evaluating the football programs, again, I'm going to go back to, I think we all had this, or most of us had this assumption, and I will include myself, that Sure, either the Big Ten or the SEC would want Florida State because they add value. Now, the one thing I will say in this, and I said it this morning, is that I've tempered that a bit by saying, does Florida State add value to the Big Ten? Let's take the Big Ten, for example. You could say the same thing about either one. Yes, I believe that if you add the Florida State component to a Big Ten TV schedule, and think about the matchups, folks, they would be pretty stellar. Florida State, Ohio State on down the line. Okay. That they technically add value. But there's a contract that was just signed that they have just embarked on. They're only 1 year into a 7-year deal that is paying $8 billion to the Big Ten. Over $1 billion a year. Fox, as long as they're happy with that, and they must be, CBS and NBC, there's 3 networks. It's like an NFL deal are involved to tear that up. And for those media companies to go back and figure in Florida State and then say, okay, we're going to pitch you. And for those 2 entities, meaning the Big Ten and the media companies, to agree on what that value is. And for those corporations to cough up even more money when they've got to be pretty happy with what they've got. That's why most of these transitions of conferences happen at the end of these TV deals.
Correct. And what you were describing in the beginning of your statement about the assumption to me is a hubris and arrogance that led to the demise of the Pac-12 and seems to be leading to the demise of Florida State and Clemson in the current moment. Well, everybody just assumed, everybody just thought they were so much better than everybody else. It doesn't seem like there was any calculation done in these moves. And there's this we are holier than thou type attitude toward these programs and these fans, and it just rubs everybody the wrong way, and it's really destabilizing for us, Mark. You talked about the importance of sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, and it's one thing for me to sit here and assume it because it doesn't cost me anything. I can assume whatever, but it's another thing for Florida State and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're in their future and their relationships in terms of institutions and conference, for all that to be on the line and for them to make assumptions, that's a different deal.
Right. Well, you talked about relationships when it comes to business. I just want to emphasize and highlight that. Mark, you've worked with numerous types of people, I would imagine, in ESPN. Have you ever crossed somebody that's hubris and arrogant that thought they were above everybody else and demeaned you?
Oh, absolutely, I have.
And how were those people? Were those generally people that everybody liked or people hated?
They were hated.
And do you think it negatively impacted their career?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
And especially when it's just done out in the open in front of everybody else?
Yes, it's something that shouldn't be done for just the sake of doing the right thing and being, I don't want to say a good person. That's a pretty generic term, but we'll use it. A good person. You should do it for the right reasons. You should be honest and forthright and be humble and do all those things for the right reasons. But you know what? Even if you're not going to do it for the right reasons, do it for future self-preservation, to put yourself in the best place and to show yourself to be somebody that's able to be trusted and somebody that can be on a team and you can work with. Yes.
Right. And also something I don't like about generally these type of people, and Florida State has acted this way, is there's a dishonest element to the whole process as well that says, oh my goodness, the college football playoff committee completely undermined their whole premise because they didn't select a 13-0 team. But that's not why we're leaving the ACC. The ACC lied to us and negotiated in bad faith. I mean, Mark, if it was up to Florida State, these two events wouldn't be connected in any way, shape, or form. Now I'm not sure about you, but the odds of me believing that it's basic is 0%. I don't believe them at all when they say that. I think more people would generally respect Florida State, say, hey, we went 13-0, we didn't make it, we feel like we're in a G5 conference, we won out. I think some people in the Big Ten and SEC would say, I disagree with them, but I respect them for at least being honest.
Yeah, it's hard to envision a world in which Florida State would have been selected to the playoff this last year and would now be going through the same legal process.
The final thing I'll ask you about this is, have you talked to any of your Florida State contributors?
Yeah, we had a live stream over the weekend on Saturday. So folks, check it out over on the Florida State channel, because when this stuff was coming down and I thought, you know what, love to hear from them. I know that they're generally not going to, I don't want to say that they didn't give any credence to it, but certainly, as you might expect, less than most. And yeah, we had a good couple hours on live on, I believe it was Saturday.
Is their mental health well? I'm genuinely asking. Are they doing well? Because when I've noticed, when I talk to people that are arrogant and hubris about their situation, their world seems to come crashing down on them, and they don't like it. Are they doing well?
I think they'll hold up. I think they're doing just fine. They raised a scenario in which maybe Florida State would leave the ACC, and if the timing wasn't right, would go independent for a year or two before they find the destination they want in the SEC or the Big Ten.
So you're telling me they're playing, that's pretty sad that they're playing one from, we're going to this, basically a mansion, to being homeless. They're playing.
Well, is Notre Dame homeless?
Yes, they're homeless.
Okay.
They're not mightier than thou. I know they're Catholic people and they're great people, Mark, but they are not holier than thou, even though they are literally holier than thou. But, you know, they should be in a conference. Florida State should be in a conference. It's not, nobody's special in this scenario. And for Florida State to act special and slimy is just completely wrong. And I want to actually talk about the SEC after this, Mark, but
yep.
And you got any comments about Florida State other than that?
Actually, I just want to go back to something you said earlier about Greg Pflugar, and just to give him a little bit more promotion, not that he needs it, but I'll state it this way as well. I don't in any way promote myself to be some kind of realignment expert or somebody who's got a bunch of insiders working for me or connected to, or anything like that. We don't do that here at the Voice of College Football. I would certainly take, and I do at times, have people that have intel reach out to me, and so I will take those, and then I certainly respect whatever privacy I need to keep that under for a period of time. So that does happen, but that's not my thing. My thing is, okay, there's breaking news. USC, UCLA is going to the Big Ten. Okay, let's look at the pros and cons. What does this do for the Big Ten? What does this do for USC, UCLA? Let's look at how they should schedule it. How should they form the league? I enjoy going through those processes. How is USC going to play in the Big Ten? How have they played historically against the Big Ten? All of that business. Now, if there is breaking news, or if there are substantial people that make claims that are newsworthy, then that's when I attack the realignment story. But I in no way claim myself. I'm not here every day covering realignment, but of course people are interested in it. And when I believe I have something legitimate to respond to, I do. But Greg, that's something I believe he does on basically a daily basis. I shouldn't say that for sure because I don't know, but I believe he does.
Yeah, I think he's done a lot of hard work over the years, and he's been right a lot about things, and he's taken a lot of heat. And I think as a reward for his correctness and his factual representation, you should have him on just to promote his platform. And he would give great insight to everybody in the audience about moves. That's why I think he should be on. He's a very knowledgeable person. He's also a Minnesota fan, which would increase the diversity of the audience because we don't have any Minnesota fans. Let's be honest, Mark.
We got
We need all
Minnesota
the
Dave.
Yeah, we got one Minnesota fan. I forgot about him. We got one Golden Gopher. We need a few. They're the Golden Gophers, Mark. We need an extra Gopher. Okay, we need at least two if they're the Gophers.
It's a good point.
But anyway, Mark, let me ask you. So, if a 9-3 SEC team gets in the playoffs over a 10-2 Big Ten team, let's say the Big Ten team played a super weak schedule. Okay, do you
Ohio
think that would increase or decrease the likelihood of the SEC expanding to 9 conference games?
Well, it's going to decrease that chance.
Because do you believe, like me, the only reason the SEC isn't at 9 conference games is because they're waiting for what the College Football Playoff Committee does this year?
Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely. That is. Because they've toyed around with it. They've announced, I think it's been a couple straight years now, ever since Oklahoma and Texas joined. Even before that, they mentioned that they would look at it, but they have actively run it through models and scenarios and year to year and all that other business since Oklahoma and Texas have joined it. I believe that was the summer of 21. So here we are on like a 4th off season in which they have stated that they have seriously looked at it. And that's a good point, that they want to see how the College Football Playoff Committee views and is going to approach their selections. And I've got my various theories that I've stated here many times about what the committee will do. But
okay, so what would it take for the SEC to go to 9?
I think it's more about money than it is necessarily getting snubbed out of one playoff spot every 5 years or something, or what somebody would consider a snub every 5 years, because it's really just not going to come up very often. Even if they don't get the decision again, it's not going to be an every year thing. I think it's more about, can they put together a schedule where, see, in the past, it was more about, okay, we can play one extra non-conference game. So that affords, instead of our teams going 7-7 against each other, they're going to go 13-1, or maybe 14-0, or the 13-1 is going to be Vandy, so they don't matter anyway. They're not getting close to a bowl game. So we're going to increase our pool of teams' wins totals by 6 or 7. And it was usually a situation where probably 1 to 2 on average, got them into another bowl game, made them more money, more exposure, and all that. What I've heard connected to the discussion about going to 9 conference games, it has been more about how much more money can we make if we pull the week of Kentucky playing Miami of Ohio and Mississippi State playing Louisiana Monroe, et cetera, and have a bunch of Kentucky, Mississippi State games and Texas A&M, South Carolina games and decent SEC games. How much more money will that bring? Will our partners pay us for what amounts to 7, now 8 more good games rather than garbage games?
See, that's an interesting point, because the reason I was going the way I was going with the direction was I saw you and Steve Dace have a conversation, and Ward Manuel is the committee chair, I think, this year, if I'm not mistaken. And Steve was talking about he's going to look at tangible factors like strength of schedule, strength of record, and all those things. And I feel like that's a signal to me that the SEC would be more likely to go to 9 conference games if they were doing that model. Because you could be like Florida and be 8-4, but still have a legitimate argument to get into the college football playoff over a 10-2 or 11-1 ACC / Big 12 team.
Yeah, the way Dace proposed it, he used Ole Miss because for an SEC schedule, it's fairly weak this year. Or they have 2 outstanding games. They've got Georgia and they got somebody else big. Maybe it's LSU. And Dace was basically saying if they lose both of those games, and then the rest of their wins in the SEC are going to be okay, but like their best win might be like Auburn, I think, Auburn or Texas A&M, somebody like that.
Oklahoma.
They do play Oklahoma. And are you
LSU,
looking at it right?
Oklahoma, Georgia.
Okay, so let's say Oklahoma has not a great season. Maybe they go 7-5, and Ole Miss loses to LSU and Georgia. They beat Oklahoma, and let's say that's their Oklahoma, Auburn, one of those teams, their best win. That the metrics could tell you that even though Ole Miss is in the SEC and they've reached that magic 10-win figure, that they don't belong in the playoffs. Man, I'm going to have to see that to believe it.
I would too. I feel like if a 10-2 SEC team or ACC team, or not ACC, Big Ten team didn't make the playoff, I feel like the whole thing is a sham and a charade. And I honestly would go as far as saying we need to reconstruct not how the playoff is structured, but the criteria to make the playoff. Because you would be selecting another 10-2 ACC or Big 12 team at that point. And I don't care what type of schedule they play. They're just not capable of playing an Ole Miss level schedule. It's just not comparable in my mind.
Well, DeReal, I got one more call and I'm up against it, but I appreciate it. A lot of great stuff out of you. So thanks so much for calling.
Yeah, no problem. Good talking to you, Mark.
Always good to hear from DeReal. I'm going to take Matthew's call, and it's going to take Matthew. I'm going to give you like 1 minute to say whatever you want.
Well, damn. We'll get into it. No, you're good. You're good. I know you're going to Iowa. Yeah, you're good. We'll just talk tomorrow then. I'll be back on about this time, guys, because Texas has their SEC Media Day, so I'll pitch that because it's not going to take 1 minute. So we'll talk about that tomorrow.
Okay. Matthew's jumping on tomorrow. We're here at 4 Eastern on Wednesday with SEC Media Days coverage. Matthew, thanks for being here. Catch Matthew on Mondays as well on the Texas channel, of course, at 7 Eastern. And I am headed over to the Iowa channel right now with Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm for Iowa Hawkeyes Live. So, folks, we will see you in about 5 minutes over on the Iowa channel. Corey Brada and myself on Iowa football right here at the Voice of College Football. We will see you in 5 minutes.